My son left me a fortune in vintage cars and a secluded Malibu mansion, but I did not tell a soul, especially not his wife, Tiffany. She thought I was just a helpless old widow she could toss into a state-funded nursing home to pay off her secret debts. At the funeral, she whispered that she was selling my house because my son died a broke man. She had no idea that I held the keys to a $5 million secret that would bring her to her knees. The scent of white lilies was suffocating. It hung heavy in the air of the Grace AME Church, mixing with the damp smell of rain on wool coats. My only son, Jamal, lay in a polished mahogany casket at the altar. He was only 40 years old. A heart attack, the doctors said. Stress, they claimed. I stood in the front row, my back straight as a steel rod, my hands clasped so tight inside my black gloves that my knuckles ached. I did not cry. Not yet. A head nurse does not break down when there is a crisis to manage, and my instincts told me a crisis was standing right next to me. I watched my daughter-in-law, Tiffany. She was wearing a black designer dress that fit a little too perfectly for a grieving widow. Her makeup was flawless, not a single streak of mascara in sight. While the choir sang Amazing Grace, I saw the pale blue light of her phone screen reflecting on her manicured nails. She was not looking at her husband. She was texting furiously. Her thumb flew across the screen like she was closing a business deal instead of saying goodbye to the father of her child. My grandson Marcus sat on the other side of her, his head in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. He was 17, and he looked so much like Jamal, it made my heart ache. Tiffany did not put a hand on his back. She did not offer him a tissue. She just kept tapping at that screen. When the pastor asked the family to pay their final respects, I walked to the casket. I placed my hand on Jamal's cold cheek and whispered a prayer promising him I would look after his boy. Tiffany stepped up beside me. I expected a hug or maybe a shared moment of grief. Instead, she leaned in close, her expensive perfume overpowering the lilies. "Don't get too comfortable in that little bungalow of yours, Viola," she whispered, her voice ice cold against my ear, so low that only I could hear. "Jamal left us drowning in debt. I am afraid we are going to have to sell your house to cover his mistakes. You better start looking at brochures for shady pines." She pulled back instantly and dabbed at a completely dry eye with a lace handkerchief performing for the crowd behind us. I stood there frozen. My house was paid off. Jamal was a successful businessman. None of this made sense. My name is Viola. I am 68 years old, a retired head nurse who spent 40 years running the busiest ICU in Chicago. I know how to read vital signs, and I know a liar when I see one. Tiffany thought she was dealing with a feeble old woman she could bully. She was wrong. Before I tell you how I uncovered her lies and destroyed her plan, please leave a comment telling me where you are watching from and subscribe to the Never Too Old channel. We are building a community of women who know our strength. Now back to the story. I watched the hearse drive away the rain, mingling with the tears I finally let fall. But they were not just tears of sorrow anymore. They were tears of rage. Tiffany wanted a war over my home and my son's legacy. She was about to get one. The repast was held at Tiffany and Jamal's suburban home, a sprawling place with too many rooms and not enough warmth. Relatives and friends filled the living room, balancing paper plates of potato salad and fried chicken on their knees. The air hummed with low murmurs of condolences, but I sat in the corner watching. I always watched. Tiffany was in the center of the room holding court. She had changed into a different black dress, this one simpler, almost threadbare looking. It was a costume change designed for sympathy. I watched her move from group to group, dabbing her eyes and whispering loud enough for everyone to hear. "He left us with nothing," she sobbed to my sister-in-law, clutching a glass of wine. "Jamal made some bad investments, terrible ones. I do not know how I am going to feed Marcus. I do not know if we can even keep the lights on." I frowned. Jamal was meticulous. He had owned his own restoration business for 15 years. He never gambled. He never took risks he could not cover. But here was his wife painting him as a reckless failure before his body was even cold. Then Tiffany turned her eyes toward me. The room seemed to quiet down as she walked over her heels, clicking on the hardwood floor. She was holding a glossy trifold brochure in her hand like a weapon. "Mom," she said, her voice dripping with a sickly sweetness that made my skin crawl. "We need to talk about your living situation. Everyone says it is too much for you to be alone in that bungalow now that Jamal is gone. He was the one helping you pay for it, right?" That was a lie. My house had been paid off since 1995. But before I could correct her, she thrust the brochure into my hands. I took the liberty of making some calls. She continued looking around the room, ensuring she had an audience. "Shady Pines has a bed opening up next week. It is state-funded, so it won't cost us anything. It is the only way, Mom. We have to sell your house to cover Jamal's debts. It is what he would have wanted to save the family honor." I looked down at the brochure. Shady Pines. I knew the place. We used to get transfers from there at the hospital. Bed sores, malnutrition. It was a warehouse for the forgotten, not a home. I looked up at Tiffany. I did not speak. I shifted into professional mode, the head nurse assessing a patient. I watched her chest rise and fall rapidly. Her breathing was shallow. Her hand, the one holding her wine glass, was trembling ever so slightly, not with grief, but with adrenaline. Her pupils were dilated. She was terrified. A grieving widow does not try to evict her mother-in-law 3 hours after the funeral. A grieving widow does not have a rehearsed speech about debts ready for the guests. She was lying. Every word was a fabrication designed to panic me into signing over my deed. I folded the brochure carefully and placed it in my purse. I did not scream. I did not call her a liar in front of the pastor and the neighbors. I simply nodded my face a mask of calm. "We can discuss the details later, Tiffany," I said softly. "Thank you for your concern." She smiled a triumphant little smirk, thinking she had won, thinking the old woman was too broken to fight back. She turned away to refill her wine, oblivious to the fact that she had just confirmed my suspicions. She was not broke. She was desperate, and I was going to find out why. 2 days after the funeral, the silence in my bungalow was thick enough to choke on. I was sitting in my kitchen staring at a cold cup of tea when the phone rang. It was Lawrence Henderson. Lawrence had been Jamal's attorney for 15 years and his best friend since college. His voice was low and urgent. "Viola, please come to my office immediately. Do not tell anyone where you are going, especially not Tiffany." I put on my Sunday best, a navy blue suit that I had worn to church for 20 years. I took the bus downtown to the financial district. The Henderson Law Group occupied the entire top floor of a glass skyscraper that overlooked the city skyline. The elevator opened into a lobby of polished marble and original artwork. This was not the office of a lawyer who represented bankrupt men. When I walked into Lawrence's private office, he stood up and hugged me. He looked exhausted. His eyes were red-rimmed, and he aged 10 years since I last saw him. He locked the heavy oak door behind us and pulled the blinds shut. "Viola, I am going to show you things that will hurt," he said, sitting down behind a desk that cost more than my car. "But you need to know the truth. Tiffany has been spinning a narrative about debt and bad investments. She is banking on the fact that you trust her grief. But Jamal did not die broke." He opened a file folder and slid a stack of papers across the desk. My hands trembled as I picked them up. They were bank statements, but not the ones Tiffany had waved around at the repast. These showed withdrawals, massive ones. Jamal found out 2 years ago. Lawrence said, his voice steady but filled with anger. "Tiffany has been seeing someone, a man named Brad, and she has been siphoning money from Jamal's personal accounts to fund his lifestyle. 50,000 here, 20,000 there. Jamal was building a case for a divorce, Viola. He had the papers drawn up. He was ready to leave her and fight for full custody of Marcus." I felt the air leave my lungs. My son. My proud, strong son had been carrying the weight of his wife's betrayal in silence while his heart was failing. He died knowing the woman sleeping next to him was stealing him blind. But the illness moved faster than the legal system, Lawrence continued. When the doctors gave him the diagnosis, he knew he ran out of time to divorce her. He knew if he died while married to her, she would get everything. She would take his money, spend it on her boyfriend, and leave you and Marcus with nothing. Lawrence leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. So he did something drastic, something brilliant. Tiffany thinks Jamal died drowning in debt because he made sure it looked that way on paper. He moved everything, Viola, every single asset. He hid it all where she could never touch it. Jamal is not in debt. In fact, he is wealthier than he has ever been. and he left it all to you." I stared at Lawrence Henderson, my hands gripping the cold leather arms of the chair. He had just told me my son was not broke, but the reality of what he said next was almost too much to comprehend. Lawrence pulled a thick leather-bound binder from his drawer. On the cover, embossed in gold letters, were the words, "The Viola and Marcus Legacy Trust." "Jamal created this 6 months ago," Lawrence said, his voice hushed, as if the walls themselves might be listening. "He liquidated his primary assets and funneled them into this irrevocable trust. It is ironclad, Viola. Tiffany cannot touch a dime of it. She is not a beneficiary. She is not a trustee. Legally, she does not even know it exists." He opened the binder, and my breath caught in my throat. The first page listed a property in Malibu, a sprawling oceanfront estate valued at over $4 million. Jamal had bought it through a shell company years ago, planning to surprise us all one day. Now it belonged to the trust, to me and Marcus. Below that was a bank statement, $2.5 million in liquid cash sitting in an account that only I could access. I felt dizzy. My son had been building an empire while his wife was busy trying to tear it down. "But that is not all," Lawrence said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a single heavy iron key. It looked old, weathered, like something that belonged to a forgotten time. "This opens storage unit 404 at the old industrial park on the edge of town. Jamal told me this was the most important part of the legacy. He said you would know what to do with it." I took the key, my fingers tracing the rough metal. A storage unit. Why would a millionaire keep his most precious assets in a rundown facility? Lawrence leaned forward, his expression grave. "Listen to me carefully, Viola. This is critical. Tiffany believes Jamal died bankrupt. She believes the only thing left to squeeze out of this family is the equity in your bungalow. You have to let her believe that. If she finds out about the trust, about the Malibu house, or the cash, she will launch a lawsuit that will tie these assets up for years. She will claim Jamal was mentally incompetent when he signed these papers. She will use Marcus as a pawn. She will freeze everything, and you won't be able to access a cent to protect yourself or your grandson." I understood. The weight of the secret settled onto my shoulders, heavy and cold. I had to be the grieving, confused old woman she thought I was. I had to let her insult me, let her threaten me, let her think she was winning. "I will play her game, Lawrence," I said, my voice steady for the first time that day. "I will let her think I am weak." "Good," Lawrence said. "Because she is desperate, Viola, and desperate people are dangerous. You are the trustee. You have sole discretion over these assets until Marcus turns 25. You hold all the power now, but for your safety you must remain in the shadows." I nodded, tucking the heavy key into my purse right next to the brochure for Shady Pines. I walked out of that skyscraper a multimillionaire on paper, but to the world I was just a widow on the verge of homelessness. And that was exactly how I was going to destroy her. The address Lawrence gave me led to the edge of the city, where the pavement cracked and weeds grew tall through the concrete. The industrial park was a graveyard of rusted metal and abandoned dreams. It was the last place anyone would look for a fortune, which is exactly why Jamal chose it. I paid the taxi driver and stood before Unit 404. The corrugated metal door was dented and covered in layers of graffiti. It looked like it held nothing but trash and forgotten memories. My hands shook as I fit the heavy iron key into the padlock. It was stiff with rust and age fighting me, just like everything else in my life seemed to be doing lately. But I was a nurse who had wrestled life back into patients who were trying to die. I twisted the key with both hands until the lock snapped open with a loud crack that echoed in the silence. I grabbed the handle at the bottom of the door and heaved. It rolled up with a screeching protest, sending a shower of dust into the air. I coughed, waving my hand in front of my face, and stepped into the gloom. I fumbled for the light switch on the wall, praying the electricity was still on. A single row of overhead industrial lights flickered to life, buzzing like angry hornets. And then I stopped breathing. There were 5 of them. They sat under high-quality dust covers, but even covered, their shapes were unmistakable. I walked to the nearest one and pulled the fabric back. The light caught the curves of a 1965 Shelby Cobra, painted a deep midnight blue. It was flawless. It was not a scratch, not a speck of dust on the chrome. Beside it was the unmistakable silhouette of a Ferrari 250 GTO, and further down a vintage Porsche that looked like it had just rolled off the assembly line. I walked down the line, touching the cold metal of each hood. These were not just cars, they were masterpieces. Jamal had spent years restoring them, finding the parts, polishing the engines until they hummed like music. Lawrence had said the trust was worth millions, but looking at these machines, I realized the true magnitude of what my son had done. This collection alone was worth $5 million easy. A memory washed over me so strong I had to lean against the Ferrari to keep from falling. I saw Jamal at 16 sitting in the driver's seat of my beat-up Ford Taurus, his hands gripping the wheel at 10 and 2. I was in the passenger seat, terrified, teaching him how to drive. He had turned to me with that wide, bright smile of his and said, "Mom, one day I am going to drive you in a car that makes people stop and stare. One day you won't have to worry about the bus or this old thing breaking down." He had kept his promise. This was his life's work. This was the retirement fund he had built with grease on his hands and sweat on his brow, not for himself, but for us, for me and for Marcus. I looked at the cars one last time, gleaming in the dim light. Tiffany thought this unit was full of junk. She probably thought it held old furniture or broken tools. If she knew what was really in here, she would sell them for parts just to buy a new purse. I pulled the covers back over the cars, tucking them in like sleeping children. I walked out of the unit and pulled the heavy door down, the metal screaming once more before slamming shut. I locked the padlock and tugged on it to make sure it held. I stood there in the desolate lot, clutching my purse against my chest. Let Tiffany play her games. Let her cut my lights and threaten me with nursing homes. I had 5 million reasons to be patient. I turned and walked toward the bus stop, my step lighter than it had been in years. My son had left me a sword, and I was ready to wield it. The war for my home did not begin with a shout or a bang. It began with a click. I was standing in the kitchen rinsing a can of green beans for dinner when the overhead light flickered and died. The hum of the refrigerator, which had been the background noise of my life for 20 years, sputtered into silence. I wiped my hands on a towel and walked to the switch, flipping it up and down. Nothing. I checked the breaker box in the hallway. Everything was fine there. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed Tiffany. She answered on the first ring, almost as if she had been waiting for the call. "Oh, Viola," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "The power company finally cut it off. I told you Jamal left us with nothing. There is no money in the account to pay the utilities. I tried to warn you." I gripped the phone tighter. This was not about unpaid bills. This was a siege. She was trying to smoke me out like a rat in a cellar. "If you just sign the papers for the house sale," Tiffany continued, "I can get you into Shady Pines by the weekend. They have heat, Viola. They have hot meals. You do not have to live like this." I hung up. I did not give her the satisfaction of hearing me beg. I went to the linen closet and pulled out the emergency candles I kept for hurricane season. That night I sat at my kitchen table wrapped in 3 layers of sweaters, eating cold beans from the can by the flickering light of a beeswax candle. The house grew cold quickly, the damp chill settling into my bones. But I had worked double shifts in the ER during blizzards. I had raised a son on my own. A little cold was not going to break me. 3 days later, Tiffany showed up at my door. She was not alone. A tall white man with slicked back hair and a suit that looked expensive but fit poorly was standing behind her. He was chewing gum with his mouth open. "This is Brad, Tiffany," said, breezing past me into my dark, freezing living room. "He is a real estate specialist. He is here to appraise the property so we can list it quickly." Brad did not offer to shake my hand. He walked into my home like he owned it, his eyes scanning the room with a look of pure disgust. He did not look at the crown molding Jamal had installed himself. He did not look at the solid oak floors. "Total gut job," he muttered loud enough for me to hear. "Place smells like old people and mothballs. We are going to have to tear this down to the studs." He walked over to a stack of boxes I had packed with Jamal's childhood things, his old baseball trophies, and his high school yearbooks. Brad nudged the box with the toe of his polished shoe, then kicked it hard, sending a plastic trophy skittering across the floor. It broke with a sharp crack. "Garbage," he said, sneering at me. "You need to clear this trash out if you want anyone to buy this dump." I looked at the broken trophy lying on the floor. It was from the Little League championship Jamal won when he was 10. I picked it up, my hands trembling not from the cold but from a rage so hot it could have warmed the entire house. Tiffany watched me, a small, cruel smile playing on her lips. "See, Viola, Brad knows what he is talking about. This place is falling apart just like you." I placed the broken trophy on the mantel. I looked at Brad, then at Tiffany. They thought they were looking at a defeated old woman shivering in the cold. They did not know they were looking at a woman who owned a $5 million car collection and had a lawyer on speed dial. "Take your look," I said, my voice calm and steady. "But be careful where you step. You never know what might be waiting in the dark." I was sitting at my kitchen table eating cold tuna straight from the can when the front door banged open. It was Tiffany. She did not knock. She did not call. She just barged in like a landlord inspecting a squat she could not wait to demolish. She was wearing a white fur coat that probably cost more than my car, and she brought the smell of cold air and entitlement with her. "Don't get up." "Viola," she threw over her shoulder, not even looking at me. "I am just looking for assets we can liquidate." The bank called again. "It is getting ugly." Assets. She made my home sound like a failed business venture. I put down my fork and followed her, my heart hammering against my ribs. She marched straight into my bedroom. I heard the sound of wood scraping against wood as she yanked open the top drawer of my dresser. By the time I reached the doorway, she was already in my closet, a space that still smelled faintly of lavender sachets and the Old Spice cologne my husband used to wear. She was holding a rectangular velvet box. My breath hitched. Those were my pearls. A double strand of Akoya pearls my husband gave me for our 30th anniversary. They were the last gift he ever gave me before he passed. Tiffany popped the box open, glanced at them, and tossed them into her oversized designer handbag like they were plastic Mardi Gras beads. Then she reached for the top shelf. She grabbed the small leather case tucked behind my hat boxes. Jamal's Rolex, the gold Oyster Perpetual I had saved for 3 years to buy him when he graduated with his master's degree. He had worn it every day until he got sick. "Tiffany, stop," I said, my voice trembling. I did not have to fake the tremor. "Those are not yours. Please put them back." She spun around, clutching the watch case. Her eyes were hard and flat. "The funeral home just called Viola. We are short $5,000 on the casket. Apparently Jamal's life insurance lapsed months ago. Unless you have $5,000 hidden in your mattress, I have to sell this junk to pay for your son's burial. Do you want him dug up and put in a pine box? Is that what you want?" It was a lie, a vicious, cruel lie. Jamal was meticulous about his paperwork. His insurance was paid up. The funeral was fully covered. But she was betting on my shame. She was betting that a grieving mother would do anything to protect her son's dignity. My hand slid into the deep pocket of my house apron. My phone was there. I had practiced this with Lawrence. Volume down, voice memo app open. I felt the smooth glass of the screen and pressed the red circle. I needed her to say it. I needed the jury to hear the venom in her voice. "You are taking my husband's anniversary pearls and Jamal's Rolex to pay for the funeral?" I asked, pitching my voice to sound weak and helpless. "Is that really the only way, Tiffany?" "Yes," she snapped, zipping her bag shut with a finality that sounded like a gunshot. "I am taking them to the pawn shop on 4th Street right now. It is for Jamal, Viola. Stop being so selfish. If you weren't so broke, I wouldn't have to do this dirty work." She brushed past me, bumping my shoulder hard enough to make me stumble. I let her go. I stood in the hallway and watched her walk out the front door with the physical remnants of my heart in her purse. But as the door slammed, shaking the house, I pulled the phone from my pocket. I stopped the recording and saved the file. She had stolen my memories, but she had just handed me her freedom. 2 nights later, the sky broke open. Rain lashed against my windows like gravel being thrown by an angry hand. The thunder was so loud it shook the picture frames on my walls. It was the kind of storm that kept honest people inside. But then I heard it, a frantic pounding on my back door. Not the front door where visitors came, but the kitchen door where my family always entered. I pulled my robe tighter and hurried through the dark house, my flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. When I threw the bolt and opened the door, Marcus fell into my arms. He was soaked to the bone, his clothes plastered to his shivering frame. He was not wearing a coat, just a thin hoodie and sneakers that were covered in mud. "Grandma," he gasped, his teeth chattering so hard he could barely speak. "I had to get out. I had to tell you." I pulled him inside and locked the door against the storm. I wrapped him in the quilt from the sofa and sat him down at the kitchen table. I made him hot cocoa the way Jamal used to like it, extra chocolate, no marshmallows. He clutched the mug with both hands, his knuckles white. "Marcus, honey, what happened?" I asked, sitting close enough to touch his shoulder. "Why are you out in this weather?" He looked up at me, and I saw the anger burning behind his tears. "Mom is lying to you, Grandma. She is lying to everyone. She told you Dad left us broke, right? She told everyone at the funeral we were destitute." I nodded slowly. "That is what she said." "It is a lie," Marcus spat the words out. "Yesterday she came home in a brand new Mercedes, a white one with leather seats. She had 3 shopping bags from Hermes and Louis Vuitton in the trunk. She told me she got a loan from a friend, but I saw the receipt, Grandma. She paid cash, thousands of dollars in cash." My heart pounded. Cash. That meant she was spending the money she had stolen from Jamal before he died. She was blowing through her nest egg while trying to steal mine. "But that is not the worst part." Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Brad moved in. He brought his stuff over yesterday. He is sleeping in Dad's room, in Dad's bed, Grandma. He is wearing Dad's bathrobe." I felt a wave of nausea. The man who had called my home a dump was now living in my son's sanctuary, wearing his clothes, sleeping in his place. It was a desecration. "I heard them talking last night," Marcus said, leaning in close. "I was supposed to be asleep, but I was listening at the door. Brad was telling Mom that you are too stubborn. He said the only way to get this house is to forge the deed." Forge the deed. The words hung in the air, cold and deadly. "He said he knows a guy who can make it look like you signed the house over to Mom as a gift," Marcus whispered. "A gift deed, Grandma, so they do not have to pay taxes. They are planning to do it soon. Brad said once the paperwork is filed, they can evict you legally. They want to put you in that home and sell this place for cash." I looked at my grandson, his face wet with rain and tears. He had risked everything to warn me. He had run through a storm to save me. I reached out and cupped his face. "You did good, Marcus," I said, my voice fierce. "You did real good. But you cannot go back there tonight. I have to," he said, standing up abruptly. "If they wake up and find me gone, they will know I told you. She will hurt me, Grandma. Not physically, maybe, but she will cut me off. She will take away my college fund. She threatened me already." He dug into his wet jeans pocket and pulled out a small silver key. "I stole this from Brad's jacket while he was in the shower," he said, pressing it into my hand. "I heard them talking about a storage unit. Unit 404. They found the receipt in Dad's old wallet. They know where it is, Grandma. They do not know what is inside yet, but they are going there tomorrow." I looked at the duplicate key in my hand. It was identical to the one Lawrence had given me. Tiffany and Brad had found the location. The clock was ticking faster than I thought. They were coming for the cars. "Go back," I said, my heart breaking. "Be careful, Marcus. Do not let them know you know. Just watch them. Be my eyes." He hugged me tight, then slipped back out into the rain, disappearing into the night like a ghost. I locked the door and stood in the dark, clutching the stolen key. They were coming for my son's legacy. But they had made one fatal mistake. They thought they were hunting a helpless old woman. They did not know the old woman was hunting them back. I looked down at the small silver key resting in the center of my palm. It was cold and heavy against my skin. The metal was jagged and sharp, biting into my lifeline. This was not just a piece of metal. It was the spare key to Unit 404. The duplicate my son had kept hidden for emergencies. The key to a $5 million fortune that Tiffany and her boyfriend thought was nothing more than a pile of rust. Marcus wiped his nose with the sleeve of his soaked hoodie. He was shivering, but his eyes were steady. "They found the rental agreement in Dad's old filing cabinet yesterday," he said, his voice barely a whisper over the sound of the rain hammering against the roof. "They know the address, Grandma. Brad drove out there this afternoon to scout it. He could not get in because of the heavy padlock, but he looked through the vents." I held my breath. If Brad had seen the curves of that Ferrari or the chrome of the Shelby under the covers, he would know. He would know Jamal was not broke. He told Mom it looked like a junkyard. Marcus continued. He saw the dust covers and the old tires stacked in the corner. He told her Dad probably stashed a bunch of rusted-out parts and broken-down chassis in there. He called it a waste of space. I let out a breath I did not know I was holding. They did not know. They saw dust and assumed dirt. They saw a storage unit and assumed trash. But then Marcus said the words that made my blood run cold. "Mom wants quick cash, Grandma. She said she does not have time to sort through grease and oil or try to sell parts on the internet. She wants it gone. She is calling a scrap metal crew on Monday morning." Monday. That was 3 days away. "She told Brad to just have them crush it all," Marcus said, tears welling up in his eyes again. "Bale it up and haul it away for the weight. She said they might get $2,000 for the metal if they are lucky. She said it would be enough to pay off the interest on her credit card for 1 month. $2,000. I felt the room spin. She was going to take a 1965 Shelby Cobra, a vehicle worth more than this entire neighborhood, and feed it into a compactor for $2,000. She was going to take the Ferrari 250 GTO, a piece of art that belonged in a museum, and crush it into a cube of scrap metal because she was too lazy to look under a tarp. It was not just about the money, it was the disrespect. It was the erasure of my son. Those cars were his passion. He had spent thousands of hours restoring them, his hands covered in grease, his face lighting up when an engine finally turned over. They were his legacy for Marcus. And Tiffany was going to destroy them for pocket change. I gripped the key so hard it cut into my hand. The physical pain grounded me. I looked at the clock on the stove. It was 2 a.m. The scrap crew was coming Monday. I had 48 hours to stop a disaster that would wipe out my grandson's future. "You saved us, Marcus," I said, my voice fierce and low. "You have no idea what you just did. That unit is not full of scrap. It is full of gold. But you cannot tell them that. You have to let them think it is trash." I stood up and went to the window, staring out into the storm. The rain was washing away the mud on the street, but it could not wash away the greed I was up against. They wanted to crush my son's legacy. Fine, I would let them try, but they were about to find out that some metal is too hard to break and some grandmothers are too dangerous to cross. "Go back home, Marcus," I said, turning to him. "Sneak back in before they wake up. Put the key back if you can, or tell them you found it on the floor. Just buy me time." He nodded, pulling his hood up over his head. As he slipped out the back door into the night, I clutched the key to my chest. Monday was coming, and so was I. I waited until the sun came up, then I walked to an ATM 3 towns over. I pulled the sleek black debit card Lawrence had given me from the hidden lining of my purse. It was heavy cool to the touch. The screen flashed, asking for a withdrawal amount. I typed in $5,000. The machine whirred, spitting out crisp $100 bills. It was the first time I had touched the money Jamal left me. It felt like ammunition. I took a cab to a diner on the south side. Sitting in the back booth was Frank, a retired homicide detective who owed me a favor from the night I saved his life in the ER after a bad shooting 20 years ago. He looked older now, grayer, but his eyes were still sharp. I slid the envelope of cash across the table. "Find out who Brad really is, Frank," I said. "And find out why my daughter-in-law is so desperate for money." It took him less than 24 hours. When Frank came to my back door the next night, he didn't accept the coffee I offered. He just handed me a thick manila folder and looked at me with a pity I hadn't seen since the funeral. "Viola, you need to get out of that house," he said, his voice low. "Tonight." I opened the folder. The first page was a mugshot. Brad wasn't a real estate specialist. His name was Bradley Vickers, and he had done time in Florida and Nevada for real estate fraud and elder abuse. He targeted widows, Viola Frank explained, pointing to the rap sheet. He finds women who are grieving, confused, and alone. He moves in, takes over their finances, sells their assets, and then vanishes, usually right after a tragic accident. My blood ran cold. A fall down the stairs, a gas leak, a fire. That was his pattern. I turned the page to Tiffany's financial records. It was a bloodbath: online casinos, sports betting sites, high-stakes poker rooms and underground clubs. She was in the hole for over $200,000, and the debt wasn't to a bank, it was to a loan shark. Brad isn't just her boyfriend, Frank said, tapping a photo of Tiffany arguing with a man in a parking lot. He bought her debt. He owns her Viola. She promised him your house to square the ledger. That is the deal. She delivers the deed to your bungalow and he wipes her gambling slate clean. If she can't get you to sign... He didn't have to finish the sentence. If I didn't sign, they wouldn't just evict me. They would remove me. Permanently. Brad wasn't just kicking my boxes. He was measuring me for a coffin. I looked at the photos of my son's wife, desperate and dangerous, and the predator she had invited into our lives. They thought I was just a stubborn obstacle. They didn't know I was reading their playbook. I am not leaving my home, Frank, I said, closing the folder. But Viola, he started. No, I said, standing up. If they want a war, I will give them one, but I am not going to be the victim in a tragic accident. I am going to be the one who calls the cops. I locked the door after him and sat in the dark clutching the dossier. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They wanted my life. They were going to get a reckoning instead. I stared at the phone in my hand for a long time. The dossier from Frank sat open on the table, Brad's mugshot, staring up at me with cold, predatory eyes. I knew what I had to do. It was time to change the script. I picked up the phone and dialed Tiffany's number. Hello? Her voice was sharp, impatient. Tiffany! I made my voice waver, pitching it high and thin, the sound of a woman who had finally broken. It's Viola. What is it now, Viola? She sighed loud enough for me to hear. I'm very busy trying to sort out the mess your son left us. I know, I said, letting a sob catch in my throat. I know you're trying. And I can't do this anymore. The cold, the darkness. I'm tired, Tiffany. I'm just so tired. There was a pause on the other end. What are you saying? I'm saying you win, I whispered. I'll sign the papers. I'll sign the house over to you. I just want to go somewhere warm. Shady Pines. It doesn't sound so bad anymore. Really? Her tone shifted instantly. The annoyance vanished, replaced by a greedy excitement that made my stomach turn. Oh, Mom, that's the right decision. It really is. You'll be so much safer there. But I have one condition, I said, sniffing loudly. Condition. Her voice sharpened again. Viola, you're not really in a position to make demands. It's not a demand, I said quickly. It's a request, a final wish. I want to say goodbye to my home properly. I want to host one last gathering. A repast for the house, you could say. A party, she scoffed. Viola, we don't have money for a party. Just a small one, I pleaded. This Sunday, I'll make some tea and sandwiches with what I have left. I want to sign the papers there in front of everyone, in front of God and family. I want it to be dignified, proper, so everyone knows I'm doing this willingly. I held my breath. This was the hook. In front of everyone, Tiffany repeated slowly. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. A public signing. Witnesses. It would make the transfer ironclad. No one could claim later that she coerced me if I did it with a smile on my face in front of the neighbors. Yes, I said. Bring Brad. Bring a notary. Bring anyone you want. I just want it done right. Okay, she said, the triumph unmistakable in her voice. Okay, Mom, we can do that. Sunday afternoon. Brad will bring the paperwork and a notary. We'll make it a celebration, a new chapter for everyone. Thank you, Tiffany, I said, my voice trembling. Thank you for helping me. You're welcome, Mom, she said, almost laughing now. Get some rest. You sound terrible. She hung up. I lowered the phone and the trembling in my hands stopped instantly. I wiped my dry eyes. She thought I was defeated. She thought I was a confused old woman begging for a warm bed. She didn't know she had just agreed to walk into her own execution. Sunday was coming, and I had a lot of work to do. The next 48 hours were a blur of calculated precision. I was not just planning a party, I was choreographing a takedown. I met Lawrence in the back of a diner 2 towns over, far away from prying eyes. He was not alone. Sitting across from him was Sheriff Miller, a man whose wife I had nursed through cancer 3 years ago. He listened to the recording of Tiffany stealing my pearls. He looked at the dossier on Brad. His jaw tightened with every word. "We will be parked around the corner," Miller said, his voice low and dangerous. "We will have a team ready. Just give the signal, Viola, and we will take them down." I nodded. The law was on my side, but I needed more than just an arrest. I needed a total victory. Back at the bungalow, Marcus and I got to work, but we were not tidying up for guests. We were setting a stage. I made sure the house looked exactly as Tiffany expected it to look defeated. We scrubbed the floors, but we left the dust outlines on the shelves where the pawned knickknacks used to be. We left the heater off, letting the chill settle deep into the walls. I wanted them to walk in and smell my desperation. I wanted them to feel the cold air and think it was the breath of a dying woman. Then came the cameras. Marcus was brilliant. He tucked a tiny high-definition lens inside the hollowed-out spine of an old Bible on the mantel facing directly at the dining table. Another went behind the vent grate near the floor, catching the entire living room. He synced them to his phone, his fingers flying across the screen with a focus that reminded me so much of Jamal. "They won't see a thing, Grandma," he promised, checking the angles on his screen. The picture was crystal clear. "But we will see everything, every lie, every signature, every smirk." As we worked, I felt a physical change happen inside me. For months, I had been a vessel of grief, a mother hollowed out by loss. I had cried until my eyes were raw. I had trembled with fear in the dark, listening to the wind rattle the windows. But as I polished the dining table where I would sign away my home, the trembling stopped completely. The grief did not leave, but it crystallized. It hardened into something cold and sharp, like the steel scalpel I used to wield in the ER. I was not Viola, the mourning widow, anymore. I was the head nurse walking into a code blue. The emotions were distractions. Fear was a liability. I locked them all away in a box deep inside my chest. I moved through the house with a new economy of motion. I checked the angles of the cameras one last time. I verified the hidden latch on the underside of the table where I had taped the file folder. I sharpened my focus until the world narrowed down to a single point Sunday afternoon. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror. The tired, scared old woman was gone. Staring back was a warrior who was sharpening her blade, waiting for the moment to strike. They were coming to feast on my carcass, but they did not know I was the one setting the table. Sunday arrived with a sky the color of a fresh bruise. The air was thick and humid, a storm threatening to break, but holding back just like the tension in my chest. At exactly 2 o'clock, a sleek white Mercedes pulled up to the curb. It was brand new, the temporary tag still taped to the rear window. Tiffany stepped out, and for a moment I almost didn't recognize her. She was wearing a white silk pantsuit that cost more than my annual pension, her hair swept up in an elaborate twist, diamond earrings flashing in the dull light. She looked like she was arriving at a gala, not a somber family gathering to evict her mother-in-law. Brad was right behind her, wearing a suit that was too shiny and a tie that was too loud. He strutted up the walkway like he was already measuring the lawn for a pool. Trailing them was a nervous-looking man with a briefcase clutched to his chest. The notary no doubt paid extra to work on a Sunday and ask no questions. The neighbors had already started to arrive, Mrs. Gable from next door clutching a casserole dish like a shield. My cousin Althea, suspicious but silent. They filled the small living room, their voices low and murmuring. I had set out a simple spread tea sandwiches with the crusts cut off a few store-bought cookies. It looked pathetic. It looked exactly like the offering of a woman who had given up. Tiffany breezed in, bringing a cloud of expensive perfume and false cheer. "Oh, Viola!" she cried, rushing over to hug me. Her embrace was stiff, performative. She turned to the room, her voice pitching up into that sickly sweet tone she used when she wanted something. "Thank you all for coming. It means so much to Mom to have you here for this transition." She dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue. "It's been so hard," she continued, addressing Mrs. Gable directly. "Mom's confusion has gotten so much worse since Jamal passed. She forgets to eat. She leaves the stove on. We just can't risk her safety anymore. Shady Pines has a wonderful memory care unit. It's the best place for her." I stood there, head bowed, playing my part. I let her paint me as senile as a burden. I saw Althea frown confusion knitting her brow. She knew I was sharp as a tack, but Tiffany's performance was convincing. The lie was so big, so audacious, that people were afraid to question it. In the corner, Marcus stood like a statue. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides, his knuckles white. He was staring at his mother with a look of such intense betrayal, it made my heart ache. But he didn't move. He didn't speak. He remembered the plan. He was the silent sentinel, the witness to his mother's treachery. "Let's get this done, shall we?" Brad announced, clapping his hands together. "The notary has another appointment." He gestured to the dining table cleared except for a single pen. "Viola, why don't you take a seat? Let's make this official." I walked to the table, my steps slow and shuffling. I sat down heavily. The room went quiet. All eyes were on me. They thought they were watching a surrender. They didn't know they were watching the opening act of a war. The dining table felt cold under my forearms as Brad slapped a thick stack of documents onto the polished wood. The sound was loud, arrogant, like a gavel striking a bench. He didn't even bother to sit down. He just loomed over me, smelling of cheap cologne and impatience. "Here is the deed," he said, tapping a line at the bottom of the page with a thick finger. "We set it up as a gift deed like we discussed. It saves everyone the hassle of taxes. Just sign right here, Viola, and we can get you packed up." I looked at the paper. The words blurred slightly, but I didn't need to read them to know what they said. It was a death warrant for my independence. It was a legal robbery disguised as charity. The notary, a man with nervous eyes and a suit that looked like it had been slept in, pushed a pen toward me. "Please, ma'am," he mumbled, not meeting my gaze. "Just your signature here and here." I picked up the pen. My hand trembled. I made sure it did. I let the tip of the pen hover over the signature line, shaking just enough to make the ink bleed a tiny dot onto the paper. I heard Tiffany inhale sharply. I could feel her eyes on me, burning with a greed so intense it was almost physical. She was standing right behind me, practically vibrating with anticipation. She was already spending the money in her head. She was already remodeling my kitchen. She was already erasing me. "Just sign it, Mom," she whispered, her voice tight. "It is for the best. You know it is." I let the pen touch the paper again. I started to form the letter V. Then I stopped. The room was silent. You could hear a pin drop. You could hear the clock ticking on the wall. You could hear Brad's heavy breathing. I lifted the pen. I set it down on the table with a deliberate click. Then I looked up. My eyes locked onto Tiffany's. I dropped the mask. The trembling stopped. The confusion vanished. The grief was gone. In its place was the cold, hard stare of a woman who had spent 40 years staring down death in an ICU and winning. "Wait," I said, my voice clear and strong, slicing through the tension like a scalpel. "Before I sign anything, Tiffany, I have a question." Tiffany blinked, taken aback by the sudden change in my demeanor. What is it now, Viola?" "Just sign the damn paper." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "I want to know about the storage unit," I said. "Unit 404. Brad froze. His eyes darted to Tiffany. Tiffany's face went pale, then red. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. "What storage unit?" "The one Jamal rented," I said, keeping my gaze fixed on her. "The one with the 5 cars inside. What are you planning to do with them, Tiffany? Are you going to keep them, or are you going to sell them?" Tiffany let out a short, sharp laugh. It sounded like glass breaking. "Oh, that," she scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "Brad checked it out, Mom. It is just a bunch of junk. Old rusted parts. Garbage?" Jamal was too sentimental to throw away. She leaned in close, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "Don't worry about it," she said. "Brad already called a scrap crew. They are coming tomorrow morning to crush it all into cubes. We might get a couple $1,000s for the metal if we are lucky. It is just trash, Viola. Just like this house. Now sign." I looked at her. She had just admitted it. She had just confessed to planning the destruction of a $5 million legacy in front of a room full of witnesses. I smiled. It was not a nice smile. "Trash," I repeated softly. "You think it is trash." I reached under the table and pulled out the thick blue folder I had taped there hours ago. I slammed it onto the table right on top of the deed. "Well then, Tiffany," I said, standing up, "I guess you won't mind explaining to the police why you are trying to destroy the most valuable car collection on the West Coast." $2,000. Tiffany scoffed, rolling her eyes at the neighbors who were watching with bated breath. That is the quote Brad got for the scrap metal. He called the crusher this morning. They are coming at 8 a.m. sharp to clear that unit out. It is just a bunch of rusted frames and old tires, Viola. Why do you care so much about a pile of garbage? Just sign the deed so we can get you to the home. I did not look at the deed. I reached into the blue folder and pulled out the stack of high-resolution photographs Lawrence had prepared. I tossed them onto the table one by one, dealing them out like playing cards in a game of spades where I held all the aces. "Garbage!" I asked, my voice rising just enough to carry to the back of the room where Mrs. Gable was clutching her pearls. "Is that what you call a 1965 Shelby Cobra with original parts?" I slapped the first photo down. The midnight blue paint of the Cobra shimmered under the warehouse lights in the picture. "Is that what you call a Ferrari 250 GTO restored to museum quality?" I threw the second photo down. The red Italian sports car looked fast even on paper. "Is that what you call a vintage Porsche Speedster?" The third photo hit the wood. "You just admitted in front of 20 witnesses and a notary public that you arranged to destroy assets valued at over $5 million for a $2,000 check." The room went dead silent. You could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Tiffany looked down at the photos, her brow furrowed in confusion. She did not know cars. To her, a car was just something to drive to the mall. She looked at the Shelby and just saw an old car. But Brad knew. I watched the blood drain out of Brad's face. It started at his forehead and washed down to his neck, leaving him pasty and gray. He made a choking sound. He grabbed the photo of the Ferrari, his hands shaking so bad he crumpled the edge. That is a GTO, he stammered, sweat instantly beading on his upper lip. "That is real. That is not a kit." "Oh my God, Tiffany. You said it was junk. You said he was a hoarder." "It is junk!" Tiffany snapped, though her voice wavered. "Jamal did not have money for cars like that. They must be fakes. He was broke, Viola. You know he was broke." "Jamal was not broke," I said, standing up straighter, feeling the power of the truth surging through me. He was protecting his son's future from a woman who stole $50,000 from his bank account to play poker. These cars are not part of his estate, Tiffany. They belong to the Viola and Marcus Legacy Trust, a trust created 6 months before he died. And do you know who the sole trustee is? I leaned over the table, getting right in her face. "Me. You think you have a roof over your head, Tiffany. You think you can sell my bungalow because you have that big colonial in the suburbs to fall back on. But you never bothered to read the paperwork Jamal filed 3 years ago, did you?" I pulled another document from the blue folder. It was a property deed stamped with the county seal. Jamal transferred the deed to his primary residence into a limited liability company called JV Properties. Do you know who the president of JV Properties is? I pointed a finger at my chest. "Me. That house you are living in. That house where you let this man sleep in my son's bed. You do not own it. You never did. You are a tenant on a month-to-month lease, and according to my records, you are 3 months behind on rent. Consider this your eviction notice." Tiffany looked like she had been slapped. She grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself, her knuckles white. But the debt, she sputtered, desperate to find a lifeline. "Jamal left me with debt. I have bills, Viola. I have creditors calling me day and night." "You have creditors," I corrected her, my voice slicing through the room like a knife. "But they are not looking for Jamal. They are looking for you." I threw the private investigator's report onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud, spilling photos across the wood. Photos of Tiffany at the blackjack tables. Photos of her handing cash to a man in a parking lot. Bank statements highlighting withdrawals of thousands of dollars at a time. "You owe $200,000 to a loan shark because you cannot stay away from the poker tables," I said. "You drained your husband's accounts while he was dying to fund your addiction. And when the money ran out, you decided to steal from me." I pulled my phone from my pocket and pressed play. The recording I had made in my kitchen filled the silence. Tiffany's voice, tinny but unmistakable, echoed off the walls. "If you weren't so broke, I wouldn't have to do this dirty work." The sound of her zipping my pearls into her bag. The sound of her admitting to taking Jamal's Rolex. The neighbors gasped. Mrs. Gable covered her mouth with her hand. The notary looked like he wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. Tiffany looked around the room, realizing her mask had been ripped away. She was not the grieving widow anymore. She was a thief, a gambler, a liar. Her face twisted into something ugly and primal. She lunged across the table, her eyes wild. "You set me up!" she screamed, spittle flying from her lips. "You planned this. You let me think you were weak. You sat there and let me dig my own grave. You are a fraud, Viola. You are a liar and a con artist." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood my ground, the head nurse facing down a delirious patient. "I am not a liar, Tiffany," I said, my voice dropped dead calm. "And I am not your mother-in-law anymore. I am the trustee of the estate you tried to plunder. I am the landlord of the house you live in, and I am the witness to the crimes you just confessed to." I leaned in close so she could see the fire in my eyes. "I am not a fraud. I am your creditor, and I am here to collect." 6 months have passed since the sirens faded from my driveway, and the silence in my life now is different. It is not the heavy, suffocating silence of grief, but the light, breezy silence of peace. Tiffany and Brad are currently residents of the county jail awaiting trial. The judge denied bail given the severity of the fraud and the flight risk. I heard Tiffany tried to call me once collect from the facility. I did not accept the charges. She has a public defender now, just like she deserves, and plenty of time to think about the difference between a classic car and scrap metal. But I am not thinking about them today. Today I am sitting on the terrace of a home in Malibu, watching the Pacific Ocean roll in. The sun is warm on my face, and the air smells of salt and jasmine. This was Jamal's dream. He bought this place for us, for his family, to have a sanctuary away from the noise and the lies. He never got to see the ocean from this view, but every time the waves crash, I feel him here with us. Marcus walked out onto the deck holding a thick envelope. He was grinning that same wide smile his father used to have, the one that lights up his eyes. He got into Stanford. We sold the Porsche Speedster last month to a collector in Dubai. Just one car from the collection Tiffany wanted to crush for $2,000 paid for his entire 4-year education, with enough left over to start a trust of his own. The irony is not lost on me. The very assets she tried to destroy are the ones building her son's future. We walked down to the garage where the Shelby Cobra sat gleaming under the lights. I ran my hand over the midnight blue hood, feeling the history in the metal. "I am keeping this one," I said. Marcus hopped into the passenger seat laughing. I climbed behind the wheel, feeling the power of the engine hum through the chassis as I turned the key. It roared to life, a sound like a lion waking up. We drove down the Pacific Coast Highway, the wind whipping through my hair, the ocean stretching out beside us like an endless promise. I looked over at my grandson. He looked happy. He looked free. The weight that had been pressing down on him for years, the weight of his mother's greed and his father's secrets, was finally gone. "You know, Grandma," he shouted over the wind, "Mom wanted this life so bad she was willing to destroy us for it." I looked at him, adjusting my sunglasses. She wanted the things, Marcus. She wanted the cars and the house and the clothes, but she never understood that the things do not matter if you lose your soul to get them. Your father left us money, yes, but he left us something more important. He left us the truth. He gave us the chance to see who people really are. We drove on the engine, purring beneath us, leaving the past in the rearview mirror, driving toward a future that belonged only to us. I decided not to sell the bungalow back home. I am turning it into a shelter for women who have been financially abused. I am using Jamal's legacy to make sure no other woman ever has to sit in the dark eating cold beans because someone else stole her light. So that is my story. I have one question for you. If you were in my shoes, sitting on millions of dollars with your grandson safe and his future update secure, would you leave a single dime in a commissary fund for the woman who tried to destroy you, or would you let her sit in that cell with absolutely nothing but her regrets? Let me know what you would do in the comments below. 6 months have passed since the flashing lights of the police cruisers faded from my driveway, and the silence in my life now is profoundly different. It is not the heavy, suffocating silence of grief and fear that I lived with for so long, but the light, breezy silence of absolute peace. Tiffany and Brad are currently residents of the county jail awaiting trial. The judge denied bail given the severity of the fraud, the flight risk, and the sheer number of charges stacked against them. I heard from Lawrence that Tiffany tried to call me once collect from the facility. I did not accept the charges. She has a public defender now just like she deserves, and plenty of time to sit in her cell and think about the difference between a classic car worth millions and a pile of scrap metal worth $2,000. But I do not spend my days thinking about them. They belong to the past, now locked away where they cannot hurt anyone else. Today, I am sitting on the expansive terrace of a home in Malibu, watching the Pacific Ocean roll in. The sun is warm on my face, and the air smells of salt and jasmine. This was Jamal's dream. He bought this place for us years ago, secretly renovating it for his family, to have a sanctuary away from the noise and the lies. He never got to see the ocean from this view, but every time the waves crash against the shore, I feel him here with us. Marcus walked out onto the deck, holding a thick envelope in his hand. He was grinning that same wide smile his father used to have, the one that lights up his eyes and makes the whole world feel brighter. He got into Stanford. We sold the vintage Porsche Speedster last month to a private collector in Dubai. Just one car from the collection Tiffany wanted to crush for pocket change paid for his entire 4-year education, with enough left over to start a trust of his own. The irony is not lost on me. The very assets she tried to destroy are the ones building her son's future. We walked down to the garage where the Shelby Cobra sat gleaming under the recessed lights. I ran my hand over the midnight blue hood, feeling the history in the metal. "I am keeping this one," I said softly. Marcus hopped into the passenger seat, laughing. I climbed behind the wheel, feeling the power of the engine hum through the chassis. As I turned the key, it roared to life, a sound like a lion waking up, deep and throaty and full of promise. We drove down the Pacific Coast Highway, the wind whipping through my hair, the ocean stretching out beside us like an endless blue promise. I looked over at my grandson. He looked happy. He looked free. The weight that had been pressing down on him for years, the weight of his mother's greed and his father's secrets, was finally gone. He was just a boy again with his whole life ahead of him. "You know, Grandma," he shouted over the wind, his voice reflective, "Mom wanted this life so bad. She wanted the luxury and the view and the prestige. She was willing to destroy us for it." I looked at him, adjusting my sunglasses against the glare of the setting sun. She wanted the things, Marcus. She wanted the cars and the house and the clothes because she thought they would make her someone. But she never understood that the things do not matter if you lose your soul to get them. Your father left us money, yes. But he left us something more important. He left us the truth. He gave us the chance to see who people really are when the chips are down. We drove on the engine purring beneath us, leaving the past in the rearview mirror, driving toward a future that belonged only to us. I decided not to sell the bungalow back home. I am using some of the trust money to fully renovate it, but I am not moving back in. Instead, I am turning it into a transitional home for elderly women who have been financially abused by their families. I am using Jamal's legacy to make sure no other woman ever has to sit in the dark eating cold beans because someone else stole her light. So that is my story. I have one question for you. If you were in my shoes sitting on millions of dollars with your grandson safe and his future secure, would you leave a single dime in a commissary fund for the woman who tried to put you in a state home and crush your inheritance? Or would you let her sit in that cell with absolutely nothing but her regrets? Let me know what you would do in the comments below. The most profound lesson from Viola's story is that silence should never be mistaken for weakness. Tiffany looked at her mother-in-law and saw only an obstacle, an elderly grieving widow she could easily manipulate. She failed to recognize the steel spine of a woman who had spent 40 years commanding an ICU. This story reminds us that wisdom and resilience are the true superpowers of age. While Tiffany operated with noise lies and flashy displays of unearned wealth, Viola operated with the quiet, lethal precision of a surgeon. Furthermore, the story serves as a stark warning about the blinding nature of greed. Tiffany was so focused on the quick cash from selling scrap metal and a modest bungalow that she missed the multi-million-dollar empire right under her nose. She underestimated her husband, her son, and most fatally, her mother-in-law. In the end, justice wasn't just about the money. It was about exposing the truth. Viola taught us that sometimes you have to let people play their hand fully before you lay down the royal flush. If you enjoyed watching a strong woman reclaim her power and protect her family's legacy, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more satisfying stories of justice served.